我学中文已经好几年了，也说得贼溜的啊。但假如我失忆了，中文从脑子里都删掉了的话，那我会这么做，让自己快速轻松地说一口流利的中文，而且还能享受这个过程，这个很重要啊。所以如果你现在正在学中文的话，或者打算学中文，那我强烈建议你竖起耳朵并做好笔记，因为这个视频里的干货绝对能让你在学习中文的过程当中少受罪，少掉坑，还有少走弯路。So if I were going to start from scratch and learn Chinese all over again, there are 10 key steps that I would take, which would be split into two major categories. The first category, process. This is the overall strategy and tactics that I would employ at each stage of learning. And the second category is habit. That's how I would stay consistent and invest the time required. And this is arguably the most important step. Because after all, you can have the best methods in the world, which you're going to have after the end of this video, but it doesn't matter if you don't actually show up and do the work, right? Oh, and if you stay until the end, I'll also share my tools and resources. That includes the apps, courses, and websites I would use today. I'll also throw in a study plan at the end of the video. That's including how many total hours roughly fluency should take using this unique approach. Hint, hint, it's way less than you think. My name is Neale. I'm a fluent Mandarin speaker. I co-founded Mandarin Blueprint with my friend Phil Crimmins, and we create amazing Chinese courses that get you to university level Chinese in a fraction of the time. So without further ado, let's get into step 1 to nail pronunciation. So pronunciation was one of the very few things that I did right. I focused heavily on listening and repeating. So I used a program called Pimsleur, and as a result of that, my first trip to China when I was 19 years old, I had an amazing time. I was able to get loads of compliments, my motivation and confidence as a result of that. Another often overlooked benefit of great pronunciation, or very good, accurate pronunciation, is the boost you get to your listening ability. You're able to identify the sounds sooner and therefore able to get comprehensible input sooner, and comprehensible input is like key to your success with this language. So really it's about 5% theory and 95% practice. That 5% theory is quite important, knowing where to put your tongue, because it doesn't come naturally to everyone. So you can go ahead and check out my full guide to pronunciation on our YouTube channel if you want to get that theory. It'll do wonders for your tones and for your general pronunciation. Oh, and speaking of tones, that's probably the biggest problem for learners, right? Listening and repeating, just like Chinese native speakers do when they're children. So you get most of your results from that, from just listening and repeating, but there are a few little hacks you can do. One big one is learning characters using memory palace techniques that I'm going to share with you in a moment. So once you've started to grasp pronunciation, you know how to say all the sounds, the tones, the tone pairs, of which there are 19 that you need to get used to. You can jump straight into reading, learning characters, building a base vocabulary of at least 1,000 words. And this will grant you the ability to be able to consume Chinese content, which is really our goal, but let's not jump the gun here. So step 2, learn how to read as soon as possible. I ignored reading for well over a year, and it was to my detriment. I said out loud to people, I was like, I'm not going to learn those silly squiggles, but I'm going to do Chinese in a year, as in become fluent in 1 year. Well, after that 1 year, I was not only not fluent, I was just not able to put much of a sentence together at all. I had spent most of that year cramming words into my brain using a website called memrise.com. I spent about 3 hours a day for 9 months, built up 16.5 million points on this thing, and pretty much all I got from it was just a hodgepodge of random words attached to an English definition. That's how I learned them. I didn't learn them in context, and I didn't really learn the individual characters of the words. Most Chinese words are compound words, as in 2 characters. So I wasn't learning the characters individually, I was just learning the word as a whole and trying to just memorize the squiggles for each individual word. Super inefficient way of learning. But once I did learn the 3,000 characters that are kind of the minimum for advanced fluency, and I started to consume Chinese sentences by reading and listening to them, all these random words just started piecing themselves together. So I went from not being able to string a sentence together after my first year to the end of my second year achieving B2 fluency and passing the HSK 6 exam. That's how powerful reading is. So there's no need to wait until you get to 3,000, by the way, before you start diving into Chinese sentences. Once you've learned a few hundred of the most common ones, you'll be ready to start understanding a ton. In fact, the first 500 common characters in Chinese make up 80% of the language by frequency. So you'd be surprised what you can do with just a few hundred characters. Now, learning characters, of course, gives you the power to start reading, which is really good, but also it will remove that confusion that is really common in the early days caused by all of those homophones in Chinese. You see, there are only 400 or so different sounds, like shi is a sound in Chinese, or qiong is a sound. There's only 400 or so, 1,200 or so if you include the tone combinations as well. So really not very many compared to English's 10,000. So what that does is, while pronunciation is really quick to learn as a result, which is great, unfortunately there are many similar sounding words. There's like a bunch of different shis, that all just have the same pronunciation but mean completely different things. Once you learn characters, you get an image associated with each of these different sh sounds, and it all becomes very clear. You start to have a visual key, and this will allow you to see the inherent logic that exists in Chinese compound words, as in words made up of more than one character, and it makes learning words super easy. So I would work my way to 3,000 characters as soon as possible. That's 99.4% of the language by frequency, and I would try to review written and audio Chinese at the same time. Ideally, like I'm listening and reading at the same time, or doing one or the other depending on what's convenient. So if I'm out and about, or I'm doing chores around the house, or I'm traveling, it's maybe more convenient to just listen. So I'll do that and I'll repeat aloud. But whenever I can, I'll review flashcards or just read Chinese wherever possible. Reading gives you that visual element that listening doesn't have, and it just makes understanding things, makes getting comprehensible input all the easier, because just listening alone is super tough when you're just starting out. So I'd start with simple sentences, then I'd go for graded readers. That's like short content made for Chinese learners. And then after I got to at least 1,000, maybe a couple of thousand characters, I'll start dipping my toe into real Chinese content. Maybe even before then, I might start watching simpler stuff made for children, like Peppa Pig in Chinese, and trying to follow along with the subtitles. It's great watching stuff because that will give you all the visual cues and the sound as well as the subtitles at the same time, which is really handy. Now you might be watching this thinking, okay, so just learn 3,000 characters. You skipped over the part where we actually, how do we do that? That sounds really tough. And with traditional, conventional methods, it is really tough, but you won't be using conventional methods because you'll be following my advice and you'll be using memory palaces. So we call this the hands-up movie method. It's the method that we teach you in our courses step by step. We guide you from 0 to the most common 3,050 Chinese characters. So while you're working towards that 3,000 character goal, you'll be spending a good portion of your study time each day doing that. What I would do is also try to learn holistically. That would be my step 3 recommendation. I would not recommend you do what I did and just spend ages learning 3,000 characters every day, and that's pretty much all I did. And then after I learned that, I started consuming example sentences and, immersing in Chinese, watching Chinese TV, that sort of thing. And that was cool at the end. It was like a big reward. But I shouldn't have waited that long. I should have done it at the same time. Even if you do Chinese really well and you learn it in the way that I'm describing, it's very easy to become too bottom up. That means you're just focusing on the little things like learning characters, practicing pronunciation, but you're not actually using and seeing the characters and words in context and trying to use the words in context. So you don't want just top down though either. You don't want to just parrot phrases over and over again without learning the characters, without learning the words. That will give you the ability to sort of communicate in Chinese, but because your pronunciation and your foundation in general is so poor, once you stop reviewing, you'll just forget everything very quickly, and that's a common phenomenon. On the other hand, if you learn too bottom up, you'll just be bored. You'll not be using the language, you'll not be seeing it in context enough, so you need a balance, and that is holistic learning. We actually worked on this issue for many years, creating a perfect character order that unlocks compound words. All of these compound words come with example sentences made up of stuff you've already learned. So what that does is that gives you really early comprehensible input. Just after 20 or 30 hours of learning, you'll start reading Chinese sentences without help from pinyin or English translations. It's awesome. Step 4, immerse as early and as much as possible. One of my biggest mistakes was that I put off immersion way too long, just like I did with characters. But I tell you what, I'll never forget my first afternoon sitting in my little apartment, chose a random TV show, and I put it on, and I could not believe how much I understood. I had to follow the subtitles quite strongly because my reading was way better than my listening, because I hadn't done enough listening at all. But it was this magical few hours just sat there, just consuming all of these TV shows. And I still remember what they were about. I still remember very vividly what they were called. One was called 咱们结婚吧, Let's Get Married. And it was kind of cheesy one about a woman in the city working, and her mother's like pushing her to get married, and then she has all sorts of like weird, terrible dates that go wrong. And I remembered so many phrases and words, and I learned so much from those few hours because I was emotionally involved in the material. And it wasn't just the content itself that was engaging that allowed me to learn these words with barely any need for a review. It was also just the feeling of like, I can understand this stuff and I feel awesome because of that. All this work that I've put in is actually paying off. So I highly recommend that you don't put off immersion like I did. Buy some books that you'd like to be able to read one day. Every now and then turn on Peppa Pig or some TV show or even a podcast with no visuals or subtitles whatsoever, and you'll be surprised at how much you can understand as long as you've been learning characters and getting some input up until then. So the major benefit you'll get from diving into immersion and not putting it off is that your listening will start to improve. Now, unfortunately, as far as I know, there's not that many hacks to listening. You just kind of have to listen a lot. And it also helps to use things that are engaging, entertaining, content that you like, as well as stick to the movie/TV show format. Now, with Chinese content, they always come with subtitles pretty much without exception. So you'll have subtitles there to help you, and that will help your listening, and the listening will also help your reading at the same time. Plus you get the visual cues of the TV show that you're consuming. Here are some more quick immersion tips for you based on my years of experience with this. Number one, always be researching. I love the comic apps. I used to read like One Punch Man all the time, but then you get bored of that and you want to switch to something else. And it's a really good idea to have several things available at the click of a button that you are aware of, so you don't spend time searching for something new and then end up procrastinating and not consuming Chinese in that moment, right? Another point is beggars can't be choosers, as my mother used to say a lot when I was a kid. So if you are a low level, if you just started out, then don't expect to be able to just read Lord of the Rings in Chinese, follow along with a dubbed movie. Embrace ambiguity and tolerate that feeling of not being able to understand. Enjoy the feeling of, I can understand this. If you keep going, your brain will get used to it, as long as you are also building your comprehension. You've got good pronunciation and you are learning characters and building your base vocabulary of words. Step 5, practice speaking. When I started learning Chinese, I actually went to China to do it, right? I was learning on my own, but I had lots of Chinese people around me all the time, friends, my girlfriend, now wife, and I naturally spoke Chinese more often than I would have if I was outside China. But even still, I still put it off, just like I did with characters, just like I did with immersion. I put it off way too long. And yeah, I had general chit chat every day. I had to, like buying chewing gum at the shop or, ordering food. But I never broke through and challenged myself by deeper conversation, regimented, regular speaking practice. And because of that, my Chinese kind of, once I got to B2 fluency-ish, just kind of stayed there for years and I didn't break through. And that's also because I wasn't listening enough as well, I wasn't immersing enough. As for when to start speaking though, I would say it's completely up to you. Like I started speaking from day one, more basic stuff. But if you try and speak a lot without first building your comprehension, like learning characters, pronunciation, consuming the language for quite a long time, like several hundred hours, then you're not really going to be able to produce much. I mean, how can you produce Chinese if you haven't consumed it, right? You first need to consume it, then produce it. Otherwise, it's just a very slow, disappointing, kind of embarrassing process. I mean, it's always going to be awkward, no matter how much listening and watching and whatever you do in terms of immersion, it's always going to be tough when you start speaking. So you have to break through. But at least if you're to the point where you can comprehend, say, a Chinese TV show, or at least like Peppa Pig without subtitles or something like that, you're not really going to get a huge amount out of your speaking practice, in my personal opinion. Now, that's in terms of literal gains, but one of the things that you're always going to get out of any interaction with a real Chinese person and trying to practice Chinese with them is the wonderful feeling of, I am actually doing the thing. I am achieving my goal right now. This is what I've been working towards. And even if you're a very low level and you can barely understand anything, it's always good to every now and then try out speaking, because that's the goal. That's what we're trying to do this is to connect with Chinese people. At least that's most people's reason for learning Chinese. So I would say, try out speaking every now and then when you're a lower level. And then once you're able to understand more high level content like cartoons and things like that, and then maybe even TV shows and movies with subtitles or without, Once you're at that level, then you can start hitting speaking a bit harder, maybe going once or twice a week, maybe even daily speaking to your AI chatbot and having him or her talk back to you. That's a fantastic way that I've found of improving my speaking. So on top of using AI chatbots like ChatGPT to practice your Chinese, here's another few tips for you. Try shadowing. That's where you just have a piece of audio, whether it's a single sentence that you play over and over and over again. You try and speak in the same way as the speaker and alongside them as they speak. This will significantly improve your fluency and pronunciation. It's kind of like doing push-ups or stretching or yoga. It's like a way of just sort of keeping your muscles in shape. And one more tip, there's no real sacrifice for a real human being trying to connect with human Chinese people. Just find them on italki or something like that and make sure you book that in your calendar once a month, ideally once or twice a week. But it doesn't matter how good your methods are if you're not going to show up and use them and put the time in every day. So let's get into habit. And there are 5 steps to habit that you need to master. Now, habit is actually the most important thing, but I'm talking about it second, and here's why. Once you start learning Chinese, you enter what is called the honeymoon period, and that could last anywhere from a few weeks to a year, where you just, no matter how rubbish your methods are, whether you've got good methods or a bad approach, you're still going to keep going, just like I did in my first year with the language. I did not really lose my motivation until very end of the year, despite investing like hundreds of hours and eventually over 1,000 hours in the language, with getting very little results in terms of actual ability to produce and understand the language. But that's what we call motivation. That's not really habit or discipline. What we need is something to replace that motivation, because that honeymoon period will end and you're still going to have to invest at least a year or 2 in order to get to your goal of fluency. So here's how to develop unbreakable habits. Find your reasons for learning Chinese to a high level. To find something truly meaningful to you. Best way of doing this is to not think of specific reasons for learning Chinese, like I want to make more money, have better career prospects, I want to be more attractive or higher status, etc. But instead think of the specific experiences you would like to have in the language. So I'll give you a few amazing experiences that I've had over the years, and you can sort of use that as an inspiration to find your own. I've spoken on stages a few different times. I got to break out Chinese at my friend's wedding. I was the best man. I gave a best man speech, and he was marrying a Chinese person, had all kinds of Chinese family members at the wedding, and I halfway through my speech, I broke into Chinese and the crowd just roared. It was just like this amazing response from everyone. I was also able to give a speech in Chinese to my father-in-law and my wife's family when we got married, and he unfortunately passed away of cancer just a few months later, and I was there with him at his deathbed, and I was able to say nice things in Chinese along with the rest of his close family. So what experiences would you like? It doesn't have to be these big experiences that are very deep and meaningful. It could also just be rather subtle ones, such as making your friends laugh at a table while you're having dinner. So think of an experience that you would like to have, write them down in as much detail as you can, and look at these experiences, refer to them when your motivation inevitably dips. So if I was going to start from scratch learning Chinese, I would write down what experiences and things that I wanted to be able to do in Chinese. And at the same time, throughout my study, I would watch videos of other fluent Chinese learners to remind me that it's possible. Look up someone called Da Shan, a guy from Canada who's got the best Chinese I've ever seen. So do that, and that means you have your why, your reason or reasons for learning Chinese. Then what you want to do is select your identity, choose your who. So I've been for quite a long time now, maybe a couple of years, listening to some Chinese or having some interactions in Chinese every single day. Even if I'm outside of China or living in China, doesn't matter, I get it done every day. And that's because I have a very strong habit, but it's also because that habit is based around my identity, who I am as a person. I am a Chinese enthusiast. I'm a Chinese course creator. So if I go even just a few hours or a whole day without consuming some Chinese or doing something in Chinese, I feel weird. I don't feel like right. So I'll do something before I go to bed, or I'll do something while I'm picking my kid up from school on the way back, or I'll find a gap in my day where I can consume some Chinese. So you're not just learning Chinese, you are a Chinese learner or a Chinese enthusiast or a Chinese fanatic, whatever you want. Just choose one title that you want for yourself, and then you need to do behaviors that will help you become that identity. And the more behaviors that you do that support that identity, it's really hard to go back. You just become that person. This is who I am now. I'm a Chinese fanatic. So the third step is casting votes focus for your new identity. And there are two key ways for doing this that I've found that are really effective. First, you become interested in Chinese culture and China itself. So I would become interested in the culture by looking up the best Chinese movies, documentaries, and watch them, even with English subtitles. Just consume them, how they act, how they behave, what's their sense of humor like. Of course, I'd be more into Chinese food. I might even book a trip to China in my calendar, even if I couldn't afford it right now. For now, I might go to my nearest Chinatown or Chinese restaurants regularly and try to chat with people, which might be awkward at first, but it's part of the process. Just enjoy those experiences as much as you can and try to make them happen often, as well as learning to love the good and accept the bad. The more you learn about Chinese culture, of course, it's natural to learn things that you don't particularly like. There are things that I don't particularly like about Chinese culture, like spitting is too common. It's less common these days, but it's still pretty darn common. Bad driving is pretty common as well. They don't really obey the traffic rules as much as we do here in the West, but I still love it. It's kind of like having a sibling. You love them and you always will, but there's things that drive you crazy about them. They'll always have a very special place in your heart for them. And I have a very special place in my heart for China and Chinese people. So once you're working your way through that process and you're starting to immerse yourself, not just in the language, but in the culture itself, you can start working on the habit loop. So this is straight out of Atomic Habits, one of my favorite books on habit building. If you want to cast votes for your identity, it's a really good idea to make it obvious, make Chinese learning obvious around you, make it attractive, make it easy to do, less friction to starting, and also make it satisfying, make you want to do it again next time. So if you want to make Chinese obvious in your life, put Chinese books around you, Chinese posters on your wall. Again, even if you don't understand this stuff, it's fine. It's just reminding you this is who you are now. You want to make Chinese more attractive, make yourself want to learn Chinese more often. A good way of doing that is to join a community. Find somewhere on Facebook, find a forum online like Chinese forums, go on Reddit, or join our community at Mandarin Blueprint, the MB community. Just find somewhere you can fit in and stand out and say, we are Chinese learners. Hey, look what I did today, and make friends, find study buddies. Also, find methods that work, find methods that you know for sure that are taking you towards your goal, and every minute you spend is worth it. You're getting bang for your buck. If you want to make Chinese easy, you want to reduce that friction to starting, a great way of doing that is to prime your environment. However you learn Chinese, usually on your computer or your phone or your tablet, have the apps already open, ready to go before you get started, so you don't have to open them, log in, all that sort of stuff. Any friction during this early part will often cause you to procrastinate and not get started. Use the 2-minute rule. You mark your habit as complete for the day once you've done a very easy version of it. So let's say you wanted to learn characters for half an hour and review all your flashcards. That's quite a big ask. But if your goal instead is, my goal is to open my computer and review one flashcard, that takes probably less than a minute, but it's called the 2-minute rule because it's small, it's an easy version. And what usually happens is once you've done that first little bit, you'll just keep going and you'll finish the habit for the day anyway. If you want to make Chinese more satisfying, a great way of doing this is to get a habit tracker. Now, there's an app you can have on your phone, or you could have a journal, whatever it is you prefer, but you tick off your habits at the end of each day or after the habits have been completed. It's super addictive. And be sure to give yourself rewards for finishing certain habits. So you reward yourself with something. Now, ideally, this something is actually beneficial to, or at least neutral towards, your Chinese progress. So don't just, I finished my flashcards, I'll just consume an entire chocolate cake. That's going to slow you down. It's much better to have a healthy snack or go for a walk. The fourth key step in creating strong habits is to have decent health, focused on diet, sleep, and exercise. Now, I'm not a health expert, but when I was learning Chinese, I was in pretty bad shape, but I was like 24, so I kind of got away with it. But if I was going to start learning from scratch right now at the age of 36, I certainly would not do that. I would have to make sure that my health is in order, I'm getting enough sleep, my diet's okay, it's not full of eating sugar and like deep fried foods every single day, and I'm actually exercising regularly, and then I'll know that I'll get more gains when I actually learn Chinese. So highly recommend you focus a little bit on that. So let's move on to the final step of habit, which is enjoy the journey. So your motivation will go up and down. Life itself will go up and down. You'll have struggles and triumphs. You'll move house, you'll change jobs, you'll have kids, you'll have financial troubles, you'll have financial successes. But I would constantly remind myself, learning Chinese is a marathon, not a sprint. I would choose a minimum that I do every single day. And once I've done that minimum, my habits are complete and everything else is a bonus. So I know that no matter what happens, I'll be able to do this minimum no matter what. But also at the same time, I'll be completely fine with taking breaks. When I'm feeling more motivated or my life is smooth, I will take that opportunity to raise the amount I learn each day. Or when life gets in the way, it's okay with toning everything down and maybe just doing the minimum. On a smaller scale, when it comes to what you consume or the courses that you use, make sure that you're enjoying yourself. You're not just trying to consume a book that you think you should consume, even if you don't enjoy it, or a particular piece of content that you want to be able to consume, but actually it just makes you frustrated and demotivated when you do, but you're trying to force yourself through it. I did that once with Harry Potter. Phil, MB co-founder, was reading Harry Potter because he's into it. I don't really care that much about Harry Potter, but I was trying to read it just to sort of stay on his level, but I didn't really follow along. I didn't really enjoy it. And it was just not for me, but I was trying to force myself to consume it. Then I switched to something I did enjoy. I was reading comics in Chinese, and that was like my thing, right, for a long period of time. So whatever allows you to enjoy the moment, that is what you want to choose. Do what makes you happy in the moment today, because there's no end to learning Chinese or any language. Even Chinese scholars will always have more Chinese to learn. So there's no end, and that means it's all about the journey. So enjoy the journey. So let's move on to the final part of this video, tools. Now, a lot has changed since I started learning Chinese more than 10 years ago. Tons of new amazing tools available, far more accessible content. Wow, like the amount of content that's available at your fingertips these days is just incredible. So these are the tools that I would use if I was just starting out with Chinese all over again. For the build stage, learning pronunciation, characters, how to read, building that initial foundation, I would without a doubt go to Mandarin Blueprint. Now, I know I'm a bit biased here, to say the least, but that is exactly what I would do. I would just buy the blueprint and work my way through it. Now, when it comes to getting comprehensible input, we have tons of graded reading and listening material in the blueprint, but if I was going to step outside of that, I would go for Chinese Pod, which has just thousands and thousands of really well done dialogues along with PDF, things like that. And I would go to Du Chinese for our reading. That's the one that's most recommended from our members. Now, there are a bunch of flashcard softwares out there. Anki is probably the most prevalent. We like Traverse at Mandarin Blueprint, as well as Moki and Quizlet. Those are two others that I've heard are really good. Now, in terms of media platforms, like places you'll actually get Chinese immersion from, I would say YouTube/Netflix would be a great choice. There's tons of free content on YouTube, and Netflix also has a bunch of Chinese content that you can search by audio. You can search for dubbed or Mandarin audio, and you'll get tons of choices pop up. And any comic app will also work fine. Just search manhua, which means comic in Chinese, into your app store and just download the one that's the most popular. My favorite one is probably Tencent Comics. I would get Migaku or LingoPie for creating flashcards from my immersion content. And in terms of activating my language through speaking or writing, I would get italki, and of course, a chat bot. In terms of habit, there's only one thing that I would recommend, and that is getting a habit tracking app or journal or calendar. And just some final all-rounders, you want to get Pleco, which is just the best dictionary for Chinese. I still use it now, as well as a VPN. Astral or ExpressVPN are probably the best in my opinion as of this moment making this video. The VPNs are really useful while you're in China, of course, because there's things that you can't access like Netflix while you're in China. But while you're outside China, you'll be able to switch the VPN to China and be able to access the Chinese internet and download and listen to Chinese podcasts that way and Chinese videos, that kind of thing. Now, there are tons more tools that you could get that might be awesome, but these are the basics, all you'll need, in my opinion, to get through to all the way to fluency. Now, as promised, here's a bonus section, exactly how I would spend my study time each day. Just starting out, I would go through our course Pronunciation Mastery, Mandarin Speaking and Listening Kickstarter, or the Phrase Vault. Now, these courses are just packed with lots of real life phrases with hours and hours of audio lessons. Just listen and repeat in lots of different formats with really wonderful audio. So it really works well as a listen repeat resource, but you could also check out Pimsleur, and I believe Asimiel and Glossika is pretty decent too. Now, until at least 1,000 characters around intermediate level, I would spend 80% of my time on building, like getting to that 3,000, learning my initial words, focusing on pronunciation, and 20% on immersion, because it will help your listening skill keep up with your reading to at least some degree. And if you don't do any unfortunately, immersion, you'll end up with this big discrepancy in terms of your reading and listening skill. As I would work through the blueprint, this idea of consciously building chunks of the language will gradually just disappear to zero. And while that's happening, I would gradually increase to 80% spent on immersion and the remaining 20% of my time spent on output, whether that's shadowing, self-talk, or just sessions on italki with an actual Chinese person. All right, guys, that's it. Thank you so much for watching this, and make sure to comment below if you have any other tips or questions about acquiring Chinese. Happy learning, and I'll see you in the next video.